It begins like a cold case that was never meant to be reopened. In the early 2010s, several men came forward independently. They had grown up in different parts of Berlin. They did not know each other, but their childhood stories were nearly identical. As boys, the state had placed them into foster homes where they were sexually abused. And when they tried to speak, no one intervened. Journalists and researchers began checking old youth welfare files. What they found confirmed the accounts. From the late 1960s onward, West Berlin authorities had deliberately placed boys into foster homes run by men who were already known to have sexual interest in children. These were not secret arrangements. They were officially approved. They were financed with public money. They were renewed over time. The policy was closely linked to Helmut Kentler, a psychologist and sexologist who advised Berlin's youth welfare system. Kentler did not hide his position. He argued openly that adult men sexually attracted to boys could be suitable foster parents. His reasoning was that these men would be more attentive and emotionally committed than conventional carers. Sexual contact wasn't treated by him as abuse. He described it as harmless and in some cases even beneficial. There was no scientific data supporting this. There was no ethical approval process. There was no mechanism to protect the children involved. Yet Kentler's views were accepted by authorities. The boys selected for these placements were not chosen at random. They were among the most vulnerable children in West Berlin. Most were boys described in official language as neglected, homeless, or difficult. Some lived in institutions. Some had run away from home. Some came from families already in conflict with social services. They had limited ability to refuse. Their consent was not decisive. Ages varied. Many were teenagers. At least one documented case involved a child around 6 years old. Once placed, the foster fathers received state care payments. Oversight was unusually weak. Compared to standard foster cases, monitoring visits were infrequent and concerns were handled differently. Files later showed that several foster fathers were already known to authorities. Some had prior convictions or previous allegations related to sexual abuse. Others were flagged by health officers or psychologists. Despite this, children were not removed. In key cases, Kentler personally intervened. He wrote letters, issued evaluations, and used his authority to defend foster carers when concerns were raised. Normal safeguarding procedures were bypassed. When children tried to report abuse, the response followed a pattern. Their statements were doubted. Their behavior was pathologized. Complaints were reframed as discipline problems. Family members who raised alarms were ignored or overruled. Survivors later described repeated sexual abuse, control, and isolation. They described being punished for resisting and warned not to speak. In one documented case, a disabled foster child died while living in such a placement under unexplained circumstances. An autopsy was conducted. Questions were raised. The placement system did not stop. These arrangements continued through the 1970s and 1980s. In some cases, they extended into the early 2000s. By then, the structure had become normalized inside parts of the youth welfare system. Kentler's authority went largely unchallenged. Officials relied on his expertise. Academics did not publicly oppose him. Children's voices carried little weight. For decades, the case remained largely unknown outside specialist circles. Only after survivors spoke publicly did Berlin authorities commission independent investigations by universities. The investigators examined files, interviewed survivors, and reconstructed decision-making processes. Their conclusions were clear. This was not a legitimate social experiment. It was systematic abuse enabled by institutional decisions. Researchers described a network of officials and professionals who tolerated, justified, and protected placements with known pedophiles. Warning signs were documented and ignored. Safeguards were deliberately weakened. Responsibility was repeatedly shifted within the system. By the time these findings were published, criminal accountability was largely impossible. Kentler had died in 2008. Many foster fathers were already dead. Statutes of limitation had expired. Prosecutors closed cases. There were no major trials, no convictions. The Berlin Senate later acknowledged that the state had placed children into these conditions under official responsibility. Public apologies were issued. Some survivors received compensation through civil settlements. For many, this recognition came decades too late. Survivors report lifelong consequences: trauma, anxiety, difficulty trusting others, disrupted education, unstable employment, and deep mistrust of institutions that were meant to protect them. Today, the Kentler case is studied internationally in child protection, social work, and ethics programs, not because it was an isolated incident, but because it shows how abuse can operate inside legal systems, protected by authority, justified by ideology, and sustained by silence. This was not a crime hidden in the shadows. It was written into files, approved by offices, and paid for by the state.